Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Case Western Reserve University Homecoming 2021 from the Kevin Kranzich Virtual Worlds Laboratory, Nord Hall as well, and then the homes of our remote guests here. So today we have really special guests that we're going to go through round robin here, starting with Professor Marc Buchner, Associate Professor in the Department of Electrical, Computer, and Systems Engineering, and Director of this Virtual Worlds Laboratory. We also have with us Professor Tony Calabro from Cleveland Institute of Art, Game Design Department, down there in your lower left corner. And then a special guest, our alumnus, Ty Taylor, who is an independent video game developer and now publisher with his publishing group, the Quantum Astrophysicists Guild. So we're going to go in that order. And also, sorry, myself, Assistant Professor Michael Fu, with also the Department of Electrical, Computer, and Systems Engineering Department. So Professor Buchner, would you like to start us off today?
Sure. Thanks very much, Mike. And welcome to everybody. Glad you can be joining us, whether you're joining us in the lab or joining us virtually, which makes perfect sense, I think, for this whole event. What I'd like to do is to talk about history, because I'm an old guy and I know about some history here. So, and I think the history here is important and gives a context to the gaming lab and the current activities that are going on campus related directly to gaming or in a more peripheral sense. And in some way, I was thinking about how far to take it back. And I thought my birth was a little bit pushing it a little bit, but we'll move up ahead a bit from that to about 2004, I think is about the appropriate time to get started. And I was a faculty member in what was then the EECS Department, Electrical Engineering and Computer Science Department, which itself was a combination at that time of the Electrical Engineering and Applied Physics Department, the Systems and Control Engineering Department, and the Computer Science Department. So kind of a combination of all kinds of things that relate to gaming and many other things going on, dealing with technology and what is driving changes in the world today, I think. So I was called into my chair's office, Professor Moran Marigani at that time, and I wasn't quite sure why, whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. And he asked me a fairly simple question. Was I interested in developing and directing a game, I don't know if you want to call it studio, or a place where students can play games. And what he said is that there's some funds that are available through the university with what was called at that time the Provost Opportunity Grants. So fairly substantial amounts of money, up to about $500,000, that the university was investing in activities that hopefully would have a return in terms of education, a return in terms of research, and so on. And I said, I was interested in doing that, but I was not interested in having it contained to just being a game room, if you will. I said, I want this to have some kind of strong educational content to it, to be primarily oriented toward education. The game room by itself, great idea. You know, the students, I'm sure, that would want that, but I wanted to go much further than that. At least education, but also, if possible, to be involving research. So he said, yeah, that sounds good. And we went about writing a proposal to the University of Central Administration, essentially, for this idea of having a game room, but the gaming activities in that directed towards education and research. It was funded by the university, and probably the primary amount of the funding, or the majority of the funding, clearly went to developing the space, which was originally a few offices. It was a mail room. I think one of the rooms was actually, the mail room was also a TV room. I remember that very distinctly. And so the majority of the money went for that. And then, but a very significant amount of money went towards the computers and the peripherals and software as well. So the hardware and software. So we constructed over that, maybe 6 months, 9 months, the lab in its first incarnation. And then right away, we started talking with Cleveland Institute of Art. Jürgen Faust was the main person at CIA at that point, but the collaboration started with him. He was very excited about starting the collaboration. And the first thing that we went about was designing and creating a course that students can take. And this was fairly thought of as being a fairly advanced course, maybe a junior, senior level course, where students would come to that course and have a fairly significant background, either in art or in computer related areas, where the course was supposed to be almost a simulation in itself of what a game design and development prototyping process would be in industry. So students in this class, which wound up and persisted to be about half CIA students and half CWRU students, mostly computer science and computer engineering students, but sometimes from different departments as well, and including English and music as well. Not many, but a small number. And we started having this class, which had interesting issues with it right from the beginning, because CIA is kind of oriented vertically when it comes to when classes are being offered. And they kind of take up a day. And our classes are horizontally oriented. So we have Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, or Thursday. We found one day where we could meet together as a group, and then we would meet separately. The first year, as I mentioned, Jürgen Faust was involved, and beyond that, a fellow from CIA, Knut Heibenet, was involved for a great number of years, and we were really the team that worked on this course and developed it as well. The idea of the course was simple: divide the students into teams, and fairly large. The teams have been from 8 to 12, all the way up to a maximum of 25 in 1 year. And in that 1 year of 25, there was a business major who had very little background in formal either art or in computer science, and she was the lead of the group. And we would break the groups, the class into these groups, and they would develop. They would ideate, think of the game very early on. They develop it. They would prototype it, and that was the whole semester. And there was almost no lecture going on our part. We were sort of acting as, I would say, on the vice presidential level, a higher managerial level, which meant that students often didn't like us because we would throw things into the mix and say, well, what about now this happens? And we would always involve people from industry for our critiques of what's going on, midterm critiques, and also final critiques as well. And that was one of the most valuable things, I think, in terms of the students. But the overall experience was I think, extremely good. Difficult, because here we have groups from different schools and very different cultures coming together, and the students needed to understand, most importantly, how they could work on a team having team members that were coming from these drastically different cultures. And their ability to do that, and not their raw talent, was really what distinguished their end products more than anything else. Sometimes we had fantastic programmers, fantastic artists, but they couldn't come together well as a team. But when they did come together, even though they might not have been the best artists or the best computer programmers or the best, most knowledgeable in networks or AI, that's when the sparks flew and the creativity happened, and you got these products which were absolutely amazing. Ty being, you'll talk to him a little bit later, being on a team where this happened, and where this happened, he was in the room where this happened, and it happened very early on. After this one course, which persisted, and I might say one other thing about the course before I move on. This wasn't a course that you can find on the books as being a joint CIA CWRU course. It was never listed anywhere in some sense as being a course that was really in both places. It was a course at CWRU that CWRU students took, and it was a course at CIA where CIA students took. We just happened to meet together, on one day a week, and the students happened to work together. And in some sense, it shows you what you can do when you want to do something, even though there may be impediments. And I remember speaking to our president, Barbara Snyder, about this, and she was somewhat taken aback. But I think that's one of the cool things, and shows what you can do, on your own about things. So what happened after that? There was another course that was developed, and this was kind of a bookend course. So this advanced game design course was on one end, and then we created another course, which was an introduction to computer games. And that course took students to some of the fundamentals dealing with games in terms of game engines, in terms of audio, in terms of graphics, in terms of AI, and so on. And it kind of was the other bookend, the beginning bookend, which of course students need to have a background even to enter that. And in between, our view was that courses that are in CS, kind of standard courses on AI, on networks, on graphics, that these could fill in for students who are interested in gaming, either as a hobby or as a profession. And we, as a result of this, and having these courses, these bookend courses and these intermediate level courses, we created a minor. Rather short time, and actually created it over a weekend. Some minors, and it was obvious. It was obvious what courses were needed to be in it. I was a part of an effort to develop a minor, another one, I won't mention it. It took literally a year to create. And then sitting on this committee, I'm saying, we did this in a weekend. So this is a minor that gave students the ability to pursue their interest, not as a fundamental thing. Our strong belief all along was that computer science and computer engineering and the fundamentals of that were most important for students to have. And then if they want to pursue additional interest in this area, that would allow them to do so. So then we had these bookend courses. And what happened after that was probably more exciting in some ways than the courses sometimes. And that is, Case and CI became to be known in the sense of having these resources, students and faculty that were involved in computer gaming. And the whole world was beginning to look at computer gaming and say, how can I use this? And as a result of questions and relationships that started forming and collaborations that started forming, there were a large number of collaborations and exciting projects that took place between, I should say, among CIA, CWRU, and disparate departments at the university. So there have been wonderful projects with psychology department, with the School of Nursing, with the School of Medicine, as well in rheumatology, the Department of Population and Quantitative Health Sciences, the Art Museum, work with imaging and MRI. There's a whole number of research activities that have taken place that have involved students and largely undergraduate students, not exclusively, but largely undergraduate students who've had this background in gaming technology. And I mean that in a very, very broad sense. Two that I would point out in a particularly strong way was one with the School of Nursing, originated John Clashy. We're looking at developing simulations so that patients could be better patients and make better use of their doctor-patient visits, if you will, in ways that could improve their health. So we were looking at using simulations to better enable the conversations between patients and doctors for the treatment of chronic illnesses such as diabetes. We saw some amazing, interesting results with that. That evolved into simulations that in my mind are what were most heart wrenching in some sense, where we were looking at having people deal with how to deal with the end of life of their parents, with the situations that they get into in there. So that was very, very important work as well. Another very strong relationship was with psychology department and Amy Przeworski there. And another person in nursing was by Ron Hickman, and that continues to this day over many years. In the psychology department, working with Amy Przeworski and looking at the use of games to deal with issues like OCD, anxiety, and in particular for very young people, children, starting at the age of 5, going up to 10, 12, 15, in that range, dealing with different issues. For a very young child, understanding about emotions, and we created a very cool game called Mood Mission to introduce kids about and understand their own emotions and what to do when things are happening. We created a very exciting game, kind of a medieval kind of game for young children, maybe 8 to 12, to deal with anxiety and to give them tools to do it, and also to study how well these things work versus games that were more traditional in dealing with an ogre or a demon, a hack and slash versus, using behavioral changes in them to change the outcome of the game. We also have ventured into the area of augmented reality and virtual reality in very strong ways, working with the psychology department. And that involves looking at dealing with anxiety again, for students who have anxiety or kids that have anxiety, or adults even, dealing with things like bees and mice and spiders, creating a world where they can do this safely and explore this rather than being totally freaked out and, all at once. So we looked at that. We looked at using augmented reality for genetics and visualizing PCR DNA reactions, which so 1 minute I have, thank you. And music. I have a particular problem when I'm playing a vibraphone of looking down and not being able to see the music. So we created in the VR mode, the ability to see the music while I'm playing as well, which is very cool. So we've had a number of very important and valuable, I think, learning experiences, and the results of the research have been valuable in and of themselves, all as a result of having not a game room, but a place that enabled us to leverage that in an educational and a research sense. And the one other thing that I would like to add in, because I think this is very important, is that we started out with a grant from the university, in this investment into this activity. And I think in a very broad way, the university has been paid back, for that investment. And the real benefactors are really the students, most importantly. But we've also had, in particular, one individual, Kevin Kranzich, for which the lab is named, who has also donated funds to the rejuvenation of the lab. The gaming equipment in the lab, particularly gaming equipment and technology, does not have a very long lifespan by any means. So the gaming lab needs to be rejuvenated on a fast or more frequently than a normal computer lab, I would certainly say. And you saw Ty shaking his head, yes, about that. And Kevin Kranzich has been wonderful in donating funds for this rejuvenation of the lab. Also donating funds for the computer science department as well in a very large and meaningful way. So with that, I'll end. It's always hard for me to finish in 20 minutes. I've got a lot more to talk about, I know, but I'm going to stop. Mike, I'll hand it back to you.
Yes, we'll keep talking. Next, I want to introduce Professor Calabro from the Cleveland Institute of Art Game Design Department.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Everybody can see that, I'm guessing?
Yes.
Cool. All right. So first, I'm Tony Calabro, Professor of Game Design at the Cleveland Institute of Art. I'm also a founding partner of Photonic Studio here in Cleveland. I'd like to start just saying thanks to Case Western for having me talk today. I'm really excited to share information about CIA and all that we have to offer. First, I'm a graduate of the Cleveland Institute of Art. I graduated in 2006. My major was in illustration. After that, I illustrated a comic strip that was syndicated across the country from New York to LA to Washington called The Meaning of Lila, and that ran for about 7 years. After that, I founded Photonic Studio with 2 partners. They're both CIA graduates. One of them was from industrial design, and the other was from a major called Time, which was Technology Integrated Media Environment, which Marc had mentioned kind of briefly, that eventually became the game design department, but it was the major that started the collaboration class. The last 10 years, we've been making, with Photonic, making 3D visualizations, interactive applications for companies like Alcoa and Arconic, American Greetings, First Energy, Steris, and Purina. So at the bottom left here, you can kind of see a little rendering that we had done for a local architecture firm. They were trying to visualize some apartments before they were built. In the middle, we have some stuff we did for American Greetings, where we took their characters that were for the TV shows and rendered them for their different trade shows and things like that. And then on the far right, you'll see an augmented reality app that we created that was for presentations. This one specifically was for architecture, so that you could take kind of a boring 2D floor plan and see it in 3D in real life and be a bit more exciting. CIA was founded in 1882. Our graduates get a bachelor's degree in fine arts, and it's a 4-year program. We have different majors that include fine art and commercial art. Some of the fine arts being like painting and drawing, glass blowing, jewelry and metals, and then the commercial fields like photography, industrial design, game design, and animation. We actually, our glass blowing department just went kind of viral on Instagram. They posted pouring molten glass into some jack-o'-lanterns, and it got millions of views and it was pretty cool. So if you have Instagram, check it out. It's pretty awesome. Our students, when they come into the school, their first year, we all take the same things. So we get our what are called foundation classes. Everybody takes drawing, color theory, 2D and 3D design, digital art, because art pretty much always hits a computer now at some point. Their major exploration classes, they learn art history and writing. And then the rest of their career, they kind of break out into their majors and then take all those major specific classes. That leads me into game design, my department. So our classes cover the huge gamut of what game design is. They learn 2D animation and 3D animation. They don't just learn video games, they also learn about board games and game theory. Why people play games. I mean, people have so little discretionary time. So what makes them want to play your game and what brings them into that and keeps them there. We also have video game development where they learn multiple game engines like Unity, Unreal, and Game Maker. They also learn virtual reality and sound design, and then pretty much everything in between. And those lead into pretty important careers. User experience designers, marketing designers, environment artists, VFX artists. And these aren't just in the game design industry. The film industry is also requiring these types of artists now. A lot of different industries, like the automotive industry, is using user experience designers for all the new touchscreen things that go into cars. Here's some examples of work that's kind of come out of our department. On this upper left, you can kind of see a character with some VFX. We do 3D characters. You'll see kind of this pixel art character kind of next to that. And some examples of the board games and things. This one in the far right here, Eras at Odds, was a card game actually where the players would pick an alien race or faction, and then you had to play the game throughout their history from prehistoric up until advanced. And you'll see another little board game here that I'll show you kind of a better view in a minute. We have some 3D characters and just some design aspects in between. The top left here, we have some 2D sprite animation. So our students learn how to animate their characters that they design. And also this is a single sheet. So they learn how to optimize their art for the game industry so that they're using every bit of the power that the consoles or computers have. This is an example of level design here. So you can kind of see this would be like a little platformer where a character could navigate these different ladders and platforms and move their way through. And then on the lower left is kind of a better example of this board game here, Monsters and Mazes. The cool part of this class is they don't just come up with this concept, they actually make these board games. So they get the boards printed, they get dice, they make those little spinners, and they even create the box that carries it. So they make every aspect. They can grab this game and take it to their friend's house and play it if they want. I'm just going to play a little animation reel here, kind of just to show you some more aspects of that can't be shown in 2D necessarily. Turn that down. So we have some character animations. Here's a little 2D game that one of our students created with these little Cthulhu beasts. Some concept development, some 3D modeling. Here's an Unreal game that somebody had made where you use the weapon to move yourself around the level. Modeling. They use ZBrush and other industry standard softwares for those types of things. Some 3D animation for some attacks, texturing and lighting, more advanced modeling, 2D animation. That was like an attack animation. Here's some sculpting that a student did for a character. And that's about it. Let's go back. So next, I'll talk about the collaborative class that Marc kind of talked a little bit about. We get our juniors and seniors. Actually, Professor Michael Fu and I teach this class now in the fall. So this is currently going on. We have our seniors and juniors team up with Case computer science students, and they make unique games. Right now, I think we have 5 teams. And I think, like Marc said, they do everything. They come up with the concept themselves, and then they pitch it. And then they build prototypes, they integrate all that art, and then they present to industry judges at the end of the semester. Some of our notable judges in the past that we've had Microsoft, American Greetings, Eric Wolpaw. He's with Valve. He's a writer from the Half-Life series and Psychonauts. This year we have NASA, which is pretty awesome. Handelabra Games, they're an indie studio here in Cleveland, and then Roundtable Learning, they're an education game company that's in Beechwood. So we have kind of a large group of different contributors that can be part of this and can give really great feedback to our students. The unique things about this class is, again, with those giant groups of 15 students, it's kind of like an industry-sized team that students get used to. They have to be with bigger groups. In classes, it's usually a couple of students, but they have to navigate this much larger group. On top of the fact that it's not students they're necessarily comfortable with. It's from a whole nother school. We mostly make them manage their goals, and we just kind of keep them accountable to those. And it's great that the artists get to learn how the programmers work, and the programmers get to see how the artists work. It gives them great perspective that they maybe didn't have before, or helps break assumptions that they had. And the best part of it is that being such a large team, they really get to make more complete experiences. It's really an arduous task building games. So when you have a much larger team, you can get a lot more done. So I just wanted to kind of showcase a few of the projects in the past that were kind of notable fun projects. This first one here was Gnome Bocce. It was an augmented reality mobile game. You could throw this little yellow guy, was the Polina. He was the gnome, and you'll see that when he lands, he kind of makes little obstacles. And then the next player would like throw their little gnome character to try and get close to get points. You could play this as 2 players where you'd hand the device back and forth, or it could be with an AI that you could play. It's not really showcased here, but each of the little gnomes kind of had special powers too, where some of them would stick into things like darts, and some of them could make obstacles too. Some of them were heavier, some of them were lighter, but it was a really cool game. It was pretty well realized. Next, this one is a lot to deal with, but it was a really fun game. The Cave is a combination food prep dating simulation game with monsters. Yes, that's a real thing. It sounds kind of crazy, but it really worked well. You were working at a late night Denny's type place, and because it was late at night, the monsters would come in and order food. So you would have to make their food, and in the meantime, try to find a love connection. It was a really fun game, and they had multiple different monsters that came in, and lots of different ways that you could, interact with these characters and kind of either make them mad or make them happy. And it was a really good game. And then lastly, here we have Little Stitches. This was a 2-player strategy game. It was kind of like tic-tac-toe-esque, where you were these little button ladybugs, and you would use the pattern of grandma's quilt to stitch between the platforms. And when you went onto a platform, it would change colors, and then those would be how you gained points. And down here you can kind of see like a little safety pin. So there were different power-ups and things like that, where you could try to block the other person from taking your spaces and things like that. And with that, I will pass it over to Michael Fu to continue talking about a little more of this class and some other things. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. And for those of you who aren't able to join us at Arcade Day, the games are online, so you can go and play Monster Dating Sim, The Cave, okay? So I'm gonna switch screens here. So the title of our seminar today is More Than a Game. And so how do we take these games beyond entertainment? And just make it a little bit bigger here. So what I do is use video games in research. And one of the things that motivated me was my grandparents had strokes when I was in grad school and college. So I started to realize, wow, what is this thing called stroke? Learned really fast, and basically changed my career around to try to see how can I use my background in robotics, in video game development, virtual reality to improve rehabilitation. So I spent 4 years at Metro Health Hospital, which is downtown, our wonderful public hospital here, following physicians and therapists around to try to understand how people with stroke are cared for, and then started developing video games to address motor rehabilitation, movement impairment at home. So I'll talk a little bit about that just briefly today. But before I do that, we also are about education here, right? So Marc mentioned this lab is about trying to train the next generation. So I've added on a graduate version of this course that we've been talking about, so that students work with a mentor, a healthcare professional, or sometimes another faculty member to try to develop a game for education or healthcare. So one of these games was developed last year, was one of our Professor Catherine Del Torio in mechanical and aerospace engineering wanted to teach people how to use this new hexapod robot that she designed. And they had this nice Wolverine looking glove, but it attached to the fingers, and basically you could crawl and move this robot. So they made a VR game to do that. So this course was spawned by funding from National Science Foundation Career Award, and then Office of National Naval Research, which funds Dr. Del Torio's work. And this semester, we have a researcher from the VA hospital over on the other side of Wade Oval, Dr. Kristen Gilanitis. She is working with people who have paralysis of the lower limbs, and she can get them to pedal and using electrical stimulation. So that's this individual here, but their heart rate doesn't go up. So they found out that when they play a video game based on cycling, that their heart rate does go up. So now we have a team for this class who's developing a cyber cycler video game to try to continue to find ways to study how do we keep that heart rate up, because that's what you need to have aerobic benefits from exercise, right? So I'm very excited about this new direction for the course. And then of course, for those who are interested in doing this, we have one of the world leading groups at the VA called the Cleveland Functional Electrical Stimulation Center that uses electrical stimulation to restore all these bodily functions that you see listed here that are driven by electricity within our bodies. So that's where Dr. Gilanitis comes from. That's where I was trained. And as well, our students work with mentors at Metro Health Rehabilitation Hospital, which I mentioned earlier, which is the home of Case Western's Physical Medicine Rehabilitation Department. So we train all the physical and rehabilitation doctors, a lot of the therapists around town. We also do research. So all of the stroke rehabilitation, spinal cord injury research is done there. So an example of this, how do you use video games to improve rehabilitation? So we have this system that we call functional electrical stimulation plus video games. So this is for children with cerebral palsy. So they may have one hand that is weaker than the other, right? So we have electrical stimulation that helps them move that hand. So you'll see here, he calls this his Jedi mind trick, okay? So that's the weaker hand. It's being opened by electrical stimulation, and he's controlling it with the stronger hand. And then they can use that during therapy to practice tasks. So they can use it to grab things, right? Open their hand. And then at home, they use it to play video games that are controlled by the movement of their weak hand. So you see the hand is opening and closing here, and then the game responds to that. I want to give a special thank you to our Esports club. So this is the competitive video game club here at Case Western Reserve University. They selected and loaded up all the games for the arcade today from our collection. And they are 200 members strong and a very active community on campus. So thank you all the volunteers who are made today possible. So in the few minutes that we have left, let's go to Ty, because we want to make sure we get a lot of time to converse with Ty, who is an indie developer. So here we go. We're going to switch over now.
Hey, everybody, and thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay? Am I muted? Cool. Well, I guess I'll give you a bit of a background. So I graduated from Case in 2011 with both a bachelor's and a master's. Dr. Buchner was my advisor for my master's, and I also was a TA for his intro to game development class for 2 years. And I got a minor in the minor that he invented in a weekend, apparently. So that's all been really great. And even that Case, beyond just those classes, I took every opportunity to create a game every chance I could. Even for my databases project, compilers project, my regular senior capstone for the computer science degree, every opportunity I had to make a game and get class credit for it, I totally did. And I started working on my big first commercial game as an indie game developer while at Case as a part of my capstone project, which I'll start sharing the trailer for it now. This is not how it looked at Case. This is how it eventually ended up shipping 2 years after I left Case for my first game called The Bridge, which is a black and white MC Escher meets Isaac Newton puzzle platformer game where you can take control of the direction of gravity to solve all these mind-bending puzzles. This is basically what started my career as an indie game developer quite a bit. This game did pretty well for me. Has a few million downloads at this point across all the platforms I've released it on. And it's gotten quite a few awards, including IGF student nomination, where Case Western was in the Independent Game Festival that year, including PAX 10 and Indie Game Challenge and several others. The Bridge launched in 2013. After that, I used the money from this game to kind of build up a bit of a bigger team to make another game called Tumblestone, which is a competitive match 3 puzzle game. This was very much designed to be the next Tetris, which is a bit of an ambitious goal. But our plan was to make this competitive match 3 puzzle game. Microsoft really liked it. We ended up launching on Xbox as a part of the Games with Gold program, which funded the game completely and actually made it profitable from day 0, and ended up getting, I think, nearly 2 million downloads on the first week just from Xbox, not to mention Steam and all these other platforms that we launched it on. And eventually on Switch, right when Switch came out, it did pretty well there as well. And since making these 2 games, my company, QAG, we kind of decided to use the knowledge that we had from self-publishing both The Bridge and Tumblestone to help a bunch of other independent game developers do the same thing and use what we learned for integrating with the platforms and handling the business and marketing and everything along those lines. And so that's what we've been doing for the last 2 years. We've ended up launching over 10 games so far, including Cozy Grow, which is our most recent launch, which is probably one of the most well-known games, where we partnered with another big indie studio, Spryfox, to make basically an Animal Crossing-like game. So I led the publishing and porting effort for this game, and it's been a bestseller on the Nintendo Switch over the last year, which is incredibly exciting. Yeah, along this journey, I grew my company. At our peak, we're at 12 people full time. I've been inducted into the Forbes 30 under 30 in games. And yeah, it all started from, I guess, learning XNA from Dr. Buchner, which is I used to make The Bridge in the first place. But since that, Microsoft killed XNA, so now I'm on Unity for all of our games. But how do I stop sharing here? Yeah, so that's me. That's where I came from and where I am now.
Thank you so much. So we want to make this pretty interactive. So if you have questions, please type them in or just raise your hand if you're in person, and we'll just start to have a conversation with everybody about the topics that were just discussed. Any initial questions for any of us? Or from remote participants? So while we're waiting, Ty, thank you so much for sharing your indie, kind of pathway, right? And it's really impressive. What would you recommend, because given nowadays, it's probably different than when you first graduated, right? So for a recent graduate who's interested in becoming an indie developer, what's your advice for them?
Well, I have a few thoughts on this. It is way different. I mean, back in 2013, when I launched The Bridge, one of the reasons it did so well was on the front page of Steam for 2 weeks. And now that's virtually impossible. Not even major AAA games to get that because it's so crowded. There's about 300 plus games launching every week on Steam. So you've got quite a bit of competition. I would say that if you want to be an indie game developer, be sure that you are doing it out of passion. The drive to create and the drive to be a creative person, and not financially motivated. If you want to do something financially motivated, go work in financial tech with your computer science degree. Or if you still want to work in games, I would say AAA, if you can land a job there, would be possibly a lot more lucrative, because as many stories potentially like mine, or even like way more successful like Minecraft or Stardew Valley or Among Us, you hear about people making millions and millions of dollars on games. That's the 0.1% of indie game developers. The sad fact is most indie games fail, but I don't want to say that as any kind of discouragement. because making games is, at least in my opinion, one of the most fulfilling things in my life. I will be making indie games until the day I die, whether or not they're financially lucrative, just because I love it. And so if you're like me, I still highly recommend it. I would say though, to make as many game jams as possible, small prototypes. If you don't know what a game jam is, it's basically a 48-hour make a game in that time span. It's a great way to learn a new tool or try something new and different. And if it's all a waste, whatever, it's 2 days. But I've done about 20 of those in my life. Tumblestone actually started as a game jam idea that I spent 3.5 years finishing and productizing. But even in that first 48 hours of making a game, we all on the team knew it was incredibly fun and that we had something special. So using game jams as a way to explore your ideas is a great way to do that.
And thank you for the question about the classes. Hopefully I responded there. We do have at least one class every semester, so you can check those course numbers out. Any other questions?
On like a technical side, as a computer science programmer in general, what is the kind of technology that I should be learning if I want to?
So a question was from the room here, what sort of technologies, what sort of software do you need to know? Ty, you briefly mentioned Unity. So we teach Unity here as well. That's a cross-platform. So when you develop something once, it works on pretty much all the major platforms. There are also platform-specific tools as well. Unreal, for instance, they've largely become free. So you can go and download them and begin to learn them yourself. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Mike, I would say that the platforms to which you're referring are not only the PC, and the Mac, but it's also going into different kinds of VR and AR platforms as well. So it's very extensive in terms of what it's capable of giving you.
Don't forget consoles like Nintendo
And
Switch.
consoles.
Like, Switch is probably the #1 platform right now. So Unity makes a Switch port pretty straightforward.
At CIA, we teach the Adobe suite for things like Photoshop and things like that for 2D graphics, and we use Maya for 3D graphics. But there's open source and free versions of those too. You can use Blender as a great program for building 3D models, and it goes all go into Unity or the other game design programs just as easily.
And we have a question from the room. Yeah.
I guess some of these games on Unity are available online somewhere. How do we access them?
Yeah, so if you go to the Case alumni website, there is a link to our class webpage for all the games. That's the quickest way. And then there's a question from an attendee. How long does it take to create a game from start to finish? Which is a common question. And I'll just start by saying in the class, in the introduction class, we only give 4 weeks. But in the advanced class, it's the whole semester, so something like 10 to 12 weeks. And Ty, maybe you can comment on professional level. How long does it take?
It depends on the game. The Bridge, I effectively made everything except for the art myself. That took me 3.5 years. But as a caveat, that wasn't all full time. Some of that was at Case in my last year at Case, tinkering between classes. And then I didn't mention this, but I worked at Microsoft straight out of Case for 3 years on the Xbox team. And so I basically spent my nights and weekends working on the Bridge then, and that took me 3.5 years. Tumblestone was full time, and that was 10-person years for that game. So about 3 years of development there. There's a lot that goes into making a game in terms of the fit and finish at the end. There's an expression where the last 10% of development is actually the last 90% of development to actually productize it, make it platform ready on all these consoles, do all the fit and finish, everything down from making absolutely sure there's no bugs, playtesting excessively, QA, localization. There's a lot that goes into it outside of just that core game design that you get really excited about at the start.
I think we have the game link in the chat right now too, but if you go to itch.io, itch.io, and search for our course numbers, ECSE 290, or just search Case Western Reserve University. you should find the 2 pages that we have published all the student game projects on. So maybe a follow-up question for you as a the QAG publisher. If a group has a game, what is that process? Do they pitch it to you? Do you go and look out for these the next hot thing? How does that work?
It's both. Some of the games we've seen on the front page of Reddit or going viral on Twitter or something like that, and we've reached out to them because that caught our eye. But a lot of the times we get pitched. We have an open email, and we probably get 2 or 3 indie game pitches a week at this point. And it's just kind of about figuring out what's the best fit, what we can provide. But my advice for any aspiring indie, unless you are just independently wealthy or have a side hustle, making a game with no revenue coming in, like no job or any savings or anything, is pretty risky and difficult, honestly. And so one of the really nice things that a publisher will provide you is funding for your game. And even if you're giving up even a substantial cut of the back end revenue, just having the stability and the deference of risk, because you don't have to risk however much time of your own time, you're getting effectively paid for it like a job to make whatever you want. So it's a really nice arrangement if you can successfully pitch to a publisher.
Thanks for that. Any other questions? So along the lines of sort of financial sustainability, right? I think one question a lot of students have is like, how financially viable is a career as an indie developer, as opposed to, as you did, work as a software engineer and then develop the game on the side? At which point were you able to cross over? So
it does depend. A lot of people I know will work at a job like Microsoft, which of course pays very well, and just save aggressively. So they'll be frugal. Maybe they'll pay off their high interest student loans, but they'll save really smart. And after working 3 or 4 years at Microsoft, perhaps that's enough saving or stock vesting that they can quit and try it out, try the indie developer life out for a few years. And then if that doesn't work out, they can probably always go back to Microsoft or another big tech company just fine. So that's one strategy. I myself actually didn't leave Microsoft until I had launched The Bridge. I had no idea if it was going to be successful, and I had a cushy job at Microsoft. I liked my job. I was actually working on I was one of the first employees on the Xbox One, so I liked being a part of that team start to finish, and I kind of wanted to finish the Xbox One before I left. Yeah, I guess I just didn't have as much courage as some other people have to leave their high-paying job to go full indie when I knew I was doing fine nights and weekends working on my game.
And as far as, what would you say are certain differences between like a AAA, organization like Microsoft versus now owning your own sort of an indie type focus?
It's creative freedom. If you want to direct the project and make every little vision that you have, and you can do anything you want with your game, then being an indie developer is right for you. But if you're willing to sacrifice a bit of that, still work on cool stuff, still have probably a great time, assuming that you're not at a place that forces you to crunch and you're not working on something arduous, AAA might be the way to go. There's still plenty of creative outlet in AAA. It's just, it's not completely your vision unless you're the creative director, which no one goes from being a student to a AAA creative director. So I would actually recommend working in AAA just because of the financial stability while also still having that creative outlet.
And as far as games that you QAG is currently publishing, do people sort of still do that sort of work in software engineering and then work on the game on the side, or does QAG have enough sort of support that they can just focus on the game?
Oh, plenty of our partner developers still have jobs. One of our current developers are made by a couple of guys who work at Google, and just kind of a nights and weekends project. And we don't really mind about the deadline. I know that's going to take an extra year plus to finish the game, and that's fine. because it gives them the financial stability. We don't have to, I guess, pay for it, which is nice. But that is a avenue. I mean, I did that for 3 years, so I do recommend it. Moonlighting.
Hey, Ty, I was going to ask a question. What are some other things you look for besides just the concept when you're getting somebody to publish their game? Like, because I know that obviously the game prototype is important, but like, what do you look for in them or their plan for the future and things like that?
Sure. So as a publisher, a lot of what I'm going to look for is the number one thing is how well do I think the game's going to sell? Because as a publisher, at the end of the day, it's to make, I guess, everyone money. It's to sell as many copies as possible. It's to make us money and the developers money. But if it's a game that it feels like a clone, but worse of some other popular game, which is a lot of the pitches. We've already had like 5 Among Us clones pitched to us. It's got to be, I guess, a unique, compelling, original concept. I've got to be able to see what the fun is. I've got to be able to see why other players are going to be excited about it. I think it's going to need to run well on the consoles because, like I said, Nintendo Switch is by far the most lucrative console right now. So it's got to be able to run on the Switch kind of thing. The team pedigree also matters. What have they made in the past? Like prove that they are going to be able to, deliver on the game. That's pretty important. So it kind of goes back to like making as many things as possible, especially as a student. Like I had plenty of free time as a student, and so I wish I had made more games in college during that time. And just game jam as much as possible, work on projects that aren't overly ambitious. Don't try to make the next Skyrim or anything like that. Just keep it simple and just make a lot of things and finish a lot of things. Don't just start things and leave them half done. Show that you can finish a project, even if it's as small as Pac-Man or Tetris. Like make it like that scope, but really make it clean, show that you have an attention to detail and quality and the ability to fully productize and finish. And even release a game on Steam if you're done with it. Like it costs $100 and shows that you can like go and start to actually retail finish is pretty important.
Cool, thanks.
One other question from the room. Yeah.
Well, just as a student, besides speaking like 290, what's like the best way I could take advantage of resources to become like a game developer, have that set of skills?
So the question is for a student at Case, what can they do to take advantage of resources here to build toward what Ty is talking about? Professor Buchner, would you like to address that question?
Sure. And I think there's two primary ways, and maybe a third as well, following along in what Ty has said. I think the first is to take advantage of these courses, and just take the courses, take the 290, take 390, take other courses that relate, take courses that are content creation courses, whether it be in English or related to content creation, in English, in theater, in art. So there's a lot of courses I think that are appropriate. And the more you involve yourself in courses and doing things, the better it is. Even if you get a little bit from here and a little bit from here, maybe a lot from there. The other is getting involved in projects. Mike has a number of projects. I have a number of projects. Faculty have a number of projects. There's so many people that are interested in applying gaming technology to cool applications. Some pure gaming kinds of things, but others, involving other areas of engineering or non-engineering areas in the College of Arts and Sciences and so on. And the third is, I would just reinforce what Ty said. Just do it. Find something that you're interested in, get the experience, on weekends, at nights. Perhaps not at the expense of your homework and your exams, and the courses, but, fit that in. We all have extra time, whether we go hiking or doing this or doing that. So I think those are three ways that you can really deepen, your experience, and all those will be productive, and not always by yourself. Working with others, collaboration, the collaboration with CIA. I don't know if I really stressed it as much as I want to, because there are so many things, has been absolutely phenomenal in so many dimensions. And so don't be this, this one person all to yourself. Talk to artists, work with artists, talk to musicians, work with musicians, talk to psychologists, and because all these things are important when it comes to creating games, creating successful games, creating using gaming technology in other areas that are important as well.
I should mention on that, I met my partner on the bridge, the artist Mario Castaneda, who also took 390, I think the year before or after me, but not at the same time. I just happened to meet him through mutual contacts, and they did an amazing job on the bridge. It was a great connection.
At our school, the final year for students, they have a 1-year project where they, at the end of the year, they present it to a group of, their professors, and they get advisors for that. And I've had students that will grab some students from Case that they met through this class, and just they're buddies, and they help them design their games. And now they kind of both end up with the project. And
Yep.
a couple of teams that have continued after this class working on the games that they started just as friends. I mean, they meet whole new people and get some great relationships.
Yeah, it's really after the class. And also this lab is open to all engineering students. So you can just swipe in and come in. Last question from the room.
Sorry, I'm still somewhat focused on the bleak outlook for indie developers, I guess. But like, how does Steam early access fit into a strategy? I see a lot of indie developers, quote unquote, do that. Is that viable? How does that work into a strategy for an indie up and comer?
So Ty, the question, were you able to hear that?
I was not.
So the question was, it seems bleak for indie developers still. How does, maybe you could give some encouragement. How does Steam fit into it still? Or is that early access, Steam early access?
I do think Steam is a wonderful place that gives everyone at least a fair playing field. Early access is a great tool for developers who want to see some money coming in early. It's a weird balancing act though, because if you release a game too early on early access, then forever it's maybe a bad game if it gets those negative reviews. So it's kind of, you got to find the right time. But that does give you, if you're designing a game that fits early access well, it is a great avenue for you. It is bleak. That's why I do kind of recommend the publisher pitch approach, where you can try to get external funding, whether it's a publisher or a platform like Microsoft or Sony giving you money if you have a really compelling deck. But don't be afraid to put whatever you make out there. Like who knows? Like Among Us is a great example where they launched the game in 2018. It effectively flopped, and then a year and a half later, it just something happened and it sprung up. You never know. So like, the worst thing to do is to not make it available to sell on Steam, which is so easy to set up yourself.
All right, that is the end of our time today. Thank you so much for everybody being here, for Esports, helping and volunteering, for Ty for joining us, and also Professor Calabro and Professor Buchner. And special thanks to the Case Alumni Association for organizing all of these events today. And take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Everybody.